To our beautiful, wayward, and peculiar readers, in this year's edition of Toyon, we have a special treat for those of you who've been yearning to engage with content that is slightly off the beaten path from what one might expect from a literary magazine. We wanted to inspire our writers and artists to create works that interrogated topics deemed unorthodox, off-kilter, or even uncomfortable, in order to shed light on things that are commonly left unsaid. Volume 66 is dedicated to exploring the taboo, simply because we believe that breaking conventions makes for the rawest form of truth, and no one should be denied their truth. To be very clear, the call for submissions for this year's theme made sure to note that our version of Exploring the Taboo would not condone hate speech, oppressive points of view, or excessive violence without a clear purpose. Toyon values underrepresented and marginalized voices, and aims to uphold our standard of equity through every stage of our publishing process. However, we did want to give our creators freedom to interpret what taboo meant to them personally. What did they think society has deemed as unacceptable, forbidden, or divergent? How can their works challenge normativity, dismantle power structures, or just be outright unexpected? Now, we must warn you that some of these pieces may be triggering, so please remain mindful as you read through this edition. Proceed with caution. As this year's managing editor, I have had the privilege of working with as amazing a staff as a human could ask for. They poured their love and devotion into this edition. This year was not especially easy, with 2 power outages that caused us to lose 2 weeks of work time and cancel several community events, yet we never faltered. It is people like those on this year's staff who are going to change the conversation around social and environmental issues to move us all into a more intentional world. We also want to acknowledge that this book was produced on unceded territory of the Wiyot people, surrounded by the traditional, ancestral, and present homeland of several indigenous nations, including the Hupa, Karuk, Matol, Tolowa, Wailaki, and Yurok. We seek an understanding of environmental and social justice and literature that is informed by these communities. Enjoy the magazine. We hope you learn and feel something new and share it with others. Until next time, Erica Andrews, Managing Editor.
Poem for a Poet, written by Kirby M. Wright. Today the sky's immortal, forcing blue through outer space. I've read your book of poems, remembering the purple veins swirling in your temples, stuffing your mind with oxygen. I'm vanishing more and more each day despite swimming ashore lined with piles of stones. Some of the piles take human form on foggy mornings. A pelican squadron invades, gray and white wings turning silhouette when they enter the sun above me. Thinking in light keeps me from changing. I cash in the usual fantasies to imagine a kiss that never happened. Me, the melancholy boy across the aisle from you in French class. A woman in a white coat with a white cap announces my test results. My wife weeps. I die before the year ends. Write something eternal about me and you for your new book, even if you have to fake it.
Reclamation, Thomas R. Starkey-Owens. By choice or catastrophe, we will one day live with less. Cleo Wolfel Erskine. A young girl and her mother walk across the beach, flipping over logs and debris which have washed ashore, inspecting anything of interest. A chilly east wind blows, lightly scuffing their faces with gray salt. A fresh bank of fog follows the wind, smelling of salt and earth, gently rolling inland across the sand and gravel into the forested mountains. Flanking the mother and daughter on either side, the redwood bluffs of Northern California and the Pacific Ocean. Muffled rays of light stream through the banks of fog, combing through the treetops and spiraling into eddies, filling the open spaces between trees and rocks. A black crow emerges from dark corner, capturing the girl's attention. Soaring in the air without moving a muscle, the crow rises into the fog, disappears, then banks hard, reappearing in a downward spiral, only to turn and rise again into the fog. Captivated by its light, the girl takes off in a chase. The crow cocks its head and laughs in amusement, beginning to meander in the air, allowing the girl to barely keep pace. The mother, in a peaceful walk, keeps an eye on the pair as they run up the beach towards a second body of water. Breathing hard with sand filling her shoes, the girl chases the crow. The soft sound of footsteps in sand turns to loud gravel, shifting and giving way to the weight of each stride. After climbing a pile of rocks and jumping onto a fallen log, the girl lunges for the crow, who is now only a few feet away. Missing the tar-colored feathers by an inch, she barely catches her balance at the end of the log. The crow, laughing even louder now, cocks its head at the girl, but her attention was now elsewhere. Instead, she was looking into the massive river expanding before her. The crow banks again, lazily, floating about the fog, gliding upstream as if taunting the girl. Seeing her daughter jump from the log and landing only feet from the water, the mother quickens her pace. The girl resumes her pursuit of the crow, inland, up the gravel bars of the Klamath River. Losing sight of her mother, the girl continues running upstream along the banks, occasionally looking skyward for the crow. But there is no sign of the black silhouette against the foggy daylight, or among the treetops and rocky outcrops lining the river. Slowing her run to a walk, the girl takes time to catch her breath by sitting on the bank of the California's second-largest river. Listening to the rush of fresh water meeting salt at the mouth of the Klamath, the girl scans the horizon. While watching the grayish-black water turn and bubble, a flash of something in the wind catches her eye. A tar-colored feather lands at the water's edge, flickering in the breeze as if about to take flight again. The girl quickly gets to her feet and leaps, but before she could grab the feather, it explodes into the air, wafting downstream towards the ocean. Before the girl could resume her chase, her mother snatches the feather out of the air and focuses back on her daughter, now standing in awe. The sun breaks through the fog and illuminates the water, reflecting back into the mother and daughter's faces. Both now focus on the black feather, spinning it in their fingers and watching the oily tint in the sunlight. Kneeling down to brush the sand off her daughter's cheek, the mother notices the girl's gaze captured by something in the water. A shimmering silver orb dancing at the water surface only feet away from where they now stood, as if someone had dropped a slick piece of metal now briefly visible in the sunlight. A second silvery orb appeared, but further from the bank, in deeper water and moving steadily downstream. And a third, farther still from the bank and moving even faster. The mother stood, now focusing at her full attention at the water. While leaning forward trying to make sense of dancing orbs, a loud squawk startled her and broke her gaze. The crow now flying above, circling in interest. Looking back and gesturing expectantly for her daughter's hand, only the tar-colored feather lay in the gravel where the daughter stood. Slightly panicked now, the mother looks upstream and sighs in relief, finding her daughter kneeling by the water's edge a few yards upstream. As the mother approaches the girl, the crow lands farther up the gravel bank and resumes squawking. The mother calls out to her daughter, but stops mid-sentence. The girl, squatting and reaching out a hand, was surrounded by at least a dozen silvery orbs, all shimmering in the sunlight and dancing on the surfaces of the water. Now running, the mother reaches out for her daughter and pulls her away, finding a silvery body partially emerging from the water's surface. A massive salmon, a Chinook salmon, easily the same size as the girl, lay beached, gasping and flexing its gills on the gravel bank. In an instant, the crow flies and lands on the dry, scaly body, still flexing its gills in hopes of cool, fresh water. Dwarfed by the mass of the salmon, the crow cocks its head and sinks its beak deep into the flesh, revealing bright pink muscle and a streak of blood. Leaping forward, the girl scares the crow from the bloody bank and watches it take off, landing a few yards away. Now the salmon lay motionless, with a dozen or more dead and dying salmon floating downstream, their silvery reflections on the water's surface, and twice as many crows now, perching in the treetops. The mother looks farther upstream and gasps in horror, finding hundreds, if not thousands, of silvery orbs slowly dance their way down the Klamath River, to a cacophony of squawks. On September 19, 2002, reports of dead and dying Chinook salmon began circulating among tribal and fishing communities on the lower Klamath River in Northern California. By September 20, 2002, an estimated 34,000 Chinook salmon carcasses were counted by the Uruk Tribal Fisheries Program, the Hoopa Valley Tribal Fisheries Program, and the U.S. and Wildlife. These estimates are conservative. Among the men and women who live on and tend to the Klamath River, even among biologists and the fishery agencies, it's believed more than 70,000 steelhead, Chinook, and coho salmon may have perished. These estimates make the incident the single largest fish kill in the history of the western United States. How could this happen? What circumstances led to the death of so many spawning steelhead and salmon? The official story is complicated and avoids pointing fingers, but suggests that an unusually large migration of salmon was stuck in the lower Klamath River, a section between its confluence with the Trinity River and the Pacific Ocean. The Trinity River is an tributary to the Klamath, meaning the two join before flowing out into the Pacific Ocean. In between these 2 points, the convergence of the two rivers in the ocean Lower Klamath is where the 2002 fish kill occurred. Due to a lack of fish passage, less water during a drought year, and high temperatures, the salmon were stressed. What makes for a stressful environment for salmon tends to make a perfect environment for parasites, which are particularly abundant in the Lower Klamath. So, a combination of water, temperature, parasites, and bad timing led to the death of over 70,000 spawning salmon. However, the tribal and federal fishery agencies identified management of Iron Gate Dam and Lewiston Dam as the only controllable human action which may have prevented the fish kill. Belchick et al., 2004. Hundreds of kilometers upstream of the Lower Klamath are the Iron Gate and the Lewiston Dams on the Klamath and Trinity Rivers respectively, both representing the impassable fish barriers and the end of salmon migration in the Klamath Basin. Both dams were constructed in the 1960s by the federally funded Bureau of Reclamation, at the end of a period representing the largest push for dam construction in the history of the western United States. Among rapidly growing communities in California's Central Valley, dams were a popular way to accommodate for the enormous population growth and agricultural development of the West. This period in time, 1930 to 1970, resulted in the construction and operation of 492 high-head dams in the western United States, Bohr, 2019. Water that should have been used to maintain temperatures and healthy environments for migrating salmon on the Klamath and Trinity rivers was instead diverted through thousands of miles of irrigation canals, watering crops for agriculture, and acting as a source for the municipal water. This is what killed the 70,000 salmon in the Klamath River, prioritization of water allocation in California. Do you have any idea what it takes to construct a dam? First, you have to move a river. A combination of excavators, hydraulic jackhammers, and dynamite must be used to either blast or dig a new river channel. 2 coffer dams are then put in place, acting as temporary dams or bookends with the actual dam construction site in between. Then you must drain the space between the 2 coffers and remove any loose rock or sediment. Once you've removed every trace of free-flowing water, you can then begin laying millions of cubic meters of sand, rock, or cement, or some combination of the 3, making sure to reinforce with steel along the way. The process takes years to be complete, after which large volumes of water are stored behind the newly constructed dams, creating massive reservoirs. When the Bureau of Reclamation was organized by Congress in 1902, this was meant by reclamation, taming a river by building a dam, controlling seasonal floods, and supplying millions of cubic feet of water for irrigation, creating artificial gardens in the middle of a desert. To this day, as much as 50% of the flows annually incurred in the reservoirs at the Iron Gate and Lewiston dams may be diverted for agricultural use. TRRP 2019. The construction and operation of so many dams between 1930 and 1970 at the end of World War II and the mass use of artificial fertilizers led to the perfect storm of population growth in the Central Valley of California, filling the vacuum of space created by an abundance of food, water, and employment. Today we are living in the consequences of over 100 years of reclamation, direct ecological impacts downstream of dams, physical changes to a river's channel due to flow suppression, declining fish and wildlife populations, prolonged periods of drought impacting water allocation, broken promises made to Native Americans regarding the sustainable fishery management and water rights, loss in profits in commercial fishing, inability to adapt to climate change, and more extreme weather patterns. The list goes on. California finds itself between a rock and a hard place. The changing ecological, political, and cultural climates demand the adaptive management to rethink the way we allocate water in the western United States. However, altering flow allocation in California jeopardizes the delicate artificial gardens built in the middle of the desert. Millions of people and agricultural communities now depend on water allocated from Northern California, yet Native American and fishing communities have been devastated by stark crashes in fishery populations due to an immensely violent history of mining, logging, overharvesting of salmon, and the reclamation of the Klamath Basin. not to mention the dramatic increases in unregulated acquisition of water by independent cannabis cultivation in Mendocino, Humboldt, and Trinity counties in Northern California, further depleting water available to salmon while injecting poisonous fertilizers and pesticides into the water. It's a hard conversation to have when so much is on the line, one that often leads to a cacophony of debate. 50 years ago, the idea of removing a beloved dam constructed by the Bureau of Reclamation would have received immediate criticism by the majority of white communities in the Central Valley. Today, more than 1,400 dams have been removed for restoration purposes, and more are being considered for removal as traditional ecological knowledge and Western science are used to apply pressure on water managers regarding the long-term impacts dams have on society. Belmore et al., 2017, Belmore et al., 2019. For obvious reasons, large-scale disturbances occurred downstream after the dam is removed, sometimes resulting in prolonged periods of decreased water quality due to extremely large volumes of sediment that accumulates behind the dams. East et al., 2015. This decrease in water quality can seriously dampen a river's ability to sustain a healthy ecosystem, in some cases resulting in decreased fishery populations for as much as 10 to 15 years after a dam is removed. Burrow et al., 2010. Any conversation on dam removal should note that perturbation as constructing a dam, but I would rather live in a world where we restore water, not maintain a dam. On February 18, 2010, members of over 50 organizations signed the Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement, which outlines plans to remove 4 dams on the Klamath River. Gosnell et al., 2010. In a more recent landmark decision, the 4 dams of the Klamath, including Iron Gate Dam, have been scheduled to be removed as early as 2022. The removal represents the restoration and rebirth of more than 570 miles of historic salmon habitat in the Klamath Basin. Allen, 2012. It would be hard to overstate the importance of this decision on the history of the Klamath Basin and water allocation in California. The Klamath and its tributaries have been home to hundreds of years of conflict, hardships on Native American communities, fishing communities, and endangered species. Gosnell et al., 2010. Not to mention the removal of 4 dams has never been attempted before. There is no rule book or example to follow. Although there are many unknowns in the dam removal process, dam removal represents an ambitious new field that has never been possible till now. There are many questions that must be answered regarding the removal process, and the lessons learned from removing the dams on the Klamath River will undoubtedly contribute valuable information to the field of stream restoration. It'll be a hard journey, but it makes for a hell of a better reclamation story.
Saving Her by Deborah Kearns. I keep a bottle of her perfume upon the shelf, hidden behind a wall of books, where the sudden sight of it cannot take me by surprise. Only this favorite fragrance of hers, a 1970s mix of orange blossom and hyacinth, can raise her from the dead. 30 years later, its familiar sweetness is still too powerful for me to linger over. It rends me between fury and grief. And yet, I treasure that bottle of Anais, Anais, the only portal to her that remains. Earlier than I can remember, she led me to believe I could save her. But I couldn't.
Imaginary Grave by Bailey M. Tennery. A gravesite is the place I'll go when I miss you. I'll talk to the memory of you. No better place to mourn than a field where hundreds of dead are buried, side by side, systematically. I'll go to a graveside, but won't sit in front of a specific slab of stone because your name is not on one. You're alive, but it's easier to pretend you're dead when I want to remember the good person you once were. I'll place purple tulips on the maintained grass and sit for hours telling you my troubles, joys, and humorous tales. When I'm done spilling my heart to an imaginary grave, I'll walk away, leaving the flowers to wither. When I want to feel close to you, I'll return again to dead tulips and pretend you are never a stranger, pretend you are dead, and pretend I still love you.
On Broadway, you think you quit smoking. You lost your ID, all your money, accounts wiped clean. That feeling, that moment walking down the street, patting your pockets, and realizing you have nothing, or nothing, and no one's looking for you. And the tag on your toe says John Doe. Yes, I'm speaking to you, the only one who can see you in your new coat of cloud and your freedom blush.
Sweet Nightmares by Dean Engle. Read by the author. At least insomnia means no more bad dreams, the matron tells me, as she flips the switch and steals the light. She said this as if no nightmare had ever awoken her from sound asleep, as though she did not live, like me, in half-remembered dreams. Of course, she was grown, stout and gray with years of minding children and extinguishing their hopes. She did not mean any real harm, my conscience knew, but to my unconscious, to my seething skull at sleep, she was a witch or an ogre, a devilish woman sent to block the sun and make the darkness come. The dormitory is dark now, the rows of empty beds and trunks unseen. A faint light creeps through the window, but really, it just lets the shadows in to shake and rustle against the otherwise unrelenting black. During term, it isn't so bad. The dreams are small and short, as though the other boys lying around me keep the worst at bay. But now they're gone for break, and I have nowhere to go except to sleep. I lie, somehow feeling small in a twin bed, which I didn't know was possible. The covers pulled up to my chin. They're coarse, starch cotton. I curl into them, as if they could protect me, as if what's after me will come from outside. It won't. It will come from inside like always. I stare into the dark at what I know must be the ceiling, trying to stay awake. I don't know how long. I could count the ticks of the clock, but I lose track too easy. Hours maybe, or minutes. It's hopeless. I have to sleep at some point. Every night it's the same, trying to stave off the impossible for as long as possible. Just one night of clear, dreamless sleep, that's all I ask. Please. When I wake up, I'm no longer in the dormitory. I'm in a room I recognize, the upstairs parlor of my grandmother's stately Victorian. It looks just like how I remember. A row of books with brown spines and yellow pages near the fireplace, a phonograph and a smattering of records on the end table, and the window, round, shaped almost like a porthole set high on the wall. Sunlight cascades through the window and falls to the floor in a cloud of yellow dust. I walk toward it, moving slowly as though I'm wading through water. If I can reach the light, if I can see the sun, the outside, I'll be okay. It's so inviting here, everything laid out for me, but none of it's real. My grandmother's house only had one story. I'm almost to the window, to the sun. When a figure blocks the light, I look up and see my mother, dead now for 5 years, towering above me. She looks suspiciously like the matron. My mother smiles, flashing her pearly yellows, teeth stained by years of coffee and cigarettes. Son, it's so good to see you, she says. You too, Ma, I croak back. How long has it been, son? I swallow hard. 5 years, Ma. You had an accident. She's not my mother. Not really. My mother would use my name. I don't know how whatever this is doesn't already know my name, but it has never used it. I think it gleans my thoughts, and perhaps I don't think of myself enough. An accident, my almost mother asks. What happened? You hit the gas, I reply. I think you were aiming for the brake. Her face contorts, as if she were remembering, as if she saw the crumpled metal of the car and guardrail mingled and mashed together. Of course, it was an accident, she says, her voice strained. "I would never leave you." "What's my name, Ma?" I don't know. I can't remember, but I remember you. I miss you. Please, it's been so long. Give your Ma a hug." She reaches out her arms and begins walking toward me, the light still covering her back, her shadow stretched forward across the floor, coming closer and closer to me with every step. I want to. What I would give to see her again, the real her, to reach my arms around my mother and feel safe, to feel like a little kid again, happy, dumb, and untroubled, like the boys who usually sleep around me. She lurches forward, another step, and then another, and I can't move either forward or backward, stuck, as if I'm glued to the carpet. It's just a dream, and even if it's not her, it's close enough, right? The edge of her shadow leaps across the floor and grazes my foot. I stumble backward, propelling myself away from the thing that looks like my mother, away from her shadow, which keeps pushing itself closer and closer even as I scramble in the opposite direction. It tried to drain me, a quick claw that grabbed my strength and energy that, given a moment longer, I'm sure, would have grabbed my soul and devoured it. "Why are you running from me?" she asks, her voice echoing as if from some great distance. "You're not my mother," I yell back. "Give your mother a hug." She smiles, flashing teeth just as yellow, but sharp and crooked. I turn and run. I've never been to this place, but it's somehow familiar, a place I've memorized from other dreams. I know instinctively that beyond the parlor is a hallway, and from there a staircase and a bedroom, replete with a 4-poster and drapery to match. I run, and my mother follows me, snarling at my heels, seeming slightly less like the matron now, who would never stoop to such barbarity. I rush down the steps, leaping 2 at a time, round the corner, find the bedroom, and slam the door just quick enough. The thing on the other side starts to scream, begins to pound on the door, shaking it. With each beat, the door rattles more, the wood quivers, and the ear-piercing scream grows louder. Logically, if this is a dream, I need to wake, and to do that, I have to sleep. I wish I had better reasoning, but with this thing pounding at the door, trying to steal my soul, there are only so many options. I lie in the 4-poster, cover myself with dusty, unused sheets, and close my eyes. When I open them, I'm in the girls' dormitory. Even though it's dark, I know it's the girls' dormitory because the sheets are pink. The matron lacks imagination and has to color code everything. Sighing, I breathe slightly easier. There is no beast here, and at the very least, this place exists. It may not be reality, but it's one step closer. Then I hear crying, a soft whimper, and across the room I notice a shape, huddled in the twin bed directly across from mine. I stand and cautiously approach. The girl might be my age, but she is not wearing pajamas. Instead, she sports the school uniform, but of a slightly different design. The blue is a lighter shade, the skirt longer, and the stockings higher. I reach out and gently touch her shoulder. "Are you all right?" I ask. She turns to me, her lean, pale blue eyes shining huge behind a mist of tears. "Are most people who cry themselves to sleep at night all right?" I smile half-heartedly. Fair point. "What are you even doing here?" "In the girls' dorm?" I ask, looking around. It's kind of hard to explain. "Not in the dorm," she shakes her head. "Here. Wherever this really is." "Oh," I say, "you're dreaming too, aren't you?" She nods and brushes the tears from her eyes with one hand. "I don't like to cry in front of people," she says, "but seeing as you barged in on me, I think it's you who owes me the apology." I shift awkwardly from one foot to the other. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." She glares at me. Forgiven. This time. And then she smiles. I smile back, unsure of what to say. "Eliza, by the way," she says, reaching her hand out. "Will." I begin to reply automatically before I realize my mistake. I step backwards, shaking, my hand still stretched toward her, but out of defense, not politeness. "What the hell are you doing?" she asks. I look around hurriedly and gesture vaguely at the door. "Are you one of them? Are you trying to find my name?" "I'm trying to find your name so I can stop referring to you in my head as that gangly boy," Eliza replies. "Beside, at least Will's not your real name, short for William, right? That's something." I shrug, but it doesn't really feel like anything. "Are you dreaming now?" She smiles sadly. "I don't remember the last time I was awake. When were you awake last?" I don't know how to answer her question, so I say, rather lamely, "Tonight, I think." "You have to be careful," she says. "It's easy to go beyond." "What do you mean?" Eliza begins to speak, but footsteps down the hall silence her. "Do I hear voices?" someone shouts. She sounds like the matron, but the intonation is off, the phrasing not right. My matron would never ask when she could tell. Eliza motions for me to hide, so I lift her covers and ensconce myself in the darkness beneath her bed. "Just praying, ma'am," I hear Eliza say from a long way off, and then silence, as intent and all-consuming as the darkness. Maybe this is death, a void that I alone exist in, but as soon as I wonder that, I am born into a new plane, crawling out from under the bed into the school library of all places. This is not the floor of a house that doesn't exist, or a dormitory I have never been to. This is, or at least seems, like the real library, full of shelves and dust, tables and reading lamps a shade too dim. All the lights are on, perched upon the tables, casting faint iridescent shadows across the room. This is the library, the center of knowledge at this god-forsaken school. There must be something to help, right? A book on dreams, maybe. I cross the room, walking between the tables, searching the rows of books surrounding the main room. The lights give just enough to see, but barely. I can scan the shelf where I think books on dreams should be and find nothing. That's when someone strikes a light. I turn around to see a figure in black, a woman, I think, walking from one table, its lamp snuffed out, to the next table. She reaches out and kills the light, making the room grow darker. She does not seem to notice me. No, she is intent on the lamps. She moves to the next one. I run to the next shelf, and then the next as another lamp, and then another grows dark. The wall of black is growing closer to me as the woman continues her path. It's so hard to see, but still I try. Another shelf, and not a single book on dreams. Another lamp goes out, and then another. Only 3 lamps remain. I rush forward to the last shelf as the room closes in. The third goes out. Nothing on this shelf. The second goes out. I am standing at the end of the row. There are no shelves left. The woman looks up at me, but I can't make out her face. It's probably my mother or the matron or Eliza. I don't suppose it matters. She reaches toward the final lamp when I see it. Not a book, a plaque, next to the final shelf. The plaque reads, "This library is dedicated to the memory of Eliza Delane, 1931 to 1945. The final light goes out, and I wake in my bed, breathing deeply. The world outside is dark, but the lights are on, though I have no idea what time it is. I feel like I've been dreaming for hours, but maybe not. Maybe it had been minutes, maybe days. There is a knock at the door, and a second later, the matron bustles in. "You have to turn the lights off, Will," she tells me, leaving no room for argument. I try anyway. "Can I please leave them on just tonight?" She glares at me. "You need sleep, Will." "Please," I beg. "I can't sleep anyway. I can never sleep." At least insomnia means no more bad dreams, the matron tells me, as she flips the switch and steals the light.
When my brand new car first touched the truck, I did not save it. And when it punched out the headlight, although my hands were on the steering wheel, I do not remember turning it away. The sharp steel corner tore a gash down the side of the car until it collided with the solid inner bones and steel of the vehicle. The the sacred interior parts. When the car refused to move any further, the jolt whiplashed up my neck and sent a shock to my brain that suddenly put me back in the driver's seat of a wreck. I was having trouble breathing that day. It was because of the black button-down Oxford, black pants, and black shoes against the black leather interior of the car, but that was the uniform, and I was expected to be the example. It was really hot that day. Maybe not hot the way it is hot in New York in August, or hot the way it is hot in Florida during hurricane season, or hot the way it is in Mississippi, ever. It was just too hot for me to breathe that day. Northern Californians only do summers as Indian summers. We endure from Memorial Day to Labor Day and put our kids back in school before a day ever hits 80. That Saturday was September 20th of 2014, the day of Arcata's North Country Fair. The fair was well attended, and it was mere days after Humboldt State University's fall semester started. Artisans came from all over to get the first access to the students' financial aid disbursement by tempting them with a bounty of hand-carved wooden bowls, handmade soaps, and fine jewelry. As a college student, I too had loved the fair, but today it was only an obstacle between me and a parking space. By that time, I had been the manager at the Arcata Radio Shack for 6 weeks, and for 5 months had been nurturing my dream of getting into law school, quietly protecting it and defending it. Many people were overjoyed for me, but dozens of my friends and family were concerned, and it was like announcing I was moving into management all over again. Did I know that the field was dominated by men? Did I know the nature of the legal field would do everything it could to keep me small, keep my arguments unrecognized, and keep my voice unheard? The minds I was trying to convince didn't know. They knew what they thought they knew about being an attorney. They had heard it was a lot of work, a lot of hours, 60, 70, even 80 hours a week. They heard it was a lot of reading, a lot of research, a lot of problem solving. For 6 years, I had stood behind a register trying to explain to customers that I was not their enemy. I was their advocate. I wanted to help my customers, but I needed to stay within the confines of what was legal, what the corporate office would tolerate, what wouldn't damage the business to the point that it wouldn't function. I spent hours researching problems and fabricating workarounds, manipulating technology and computer systems to force it to achieve something it was not meant to do. I analyzed data every day, agonizing over which hours during the week we were more apt to sell more batteries, and then tried to recreate that environment to fully understand cause and effect. In law school, we would call this the actual and proximate cause. It was hard to explain my job, or what I had made my job, as anything other than a lowly cashier, and so I felt I couldn't explain how it could translate into law. So I carried my dream tightly, because only I saw the thread that connected my present to my future. The more the dream grew, the steps were fully realized, and the more every day working for Radio Shack was less painful, less humiliating. It meant that every day I buttoned up the black shirt to sell a dozen car chargers for the iPhone 5. I was moving farther away from a life that I had resigned myself to, let myself get lost in, and closer to a life where I could play the leading role. I maneuvered my slate gray 2009 Subaru Legacy through the tiny streets of the residential town and dodged pedestrians that had their children in tow, a beer in one hand and dreadlocks down their backs. I finally made it safely to Wells Fargo and let a little bit of the anxiety melt off of me. As my car was stopped, I tried to run through my mental checklist again, only managing to tick "find a parking spot" off of it. In a black Wells Fargo bank bag, I had a 2-inch thick brick of cash. On this busy Saturday, our deposit was close to $3,000 or $4,000, and it was only 3 in the afternoon. Troy, the previous manager, had kept Arcata staffed at around 200 hours a week, which meant that a staff of 8 employees, everyone had 25 hours a week, depending on college class schedules. When I inherited the store, I inherited that schedule as well. I didn't want to change it right away, so that day I had a full staff, but they were ready to go home. Lunch breaks had to be taken, and as soon as I arrived at the bank, I felt the urgency that I needed to get back to the store. I opened the door of my car and slapped a black kitten heel on the searing hot pavement, breathing in air that was just slightly cooler than the oven that was my sedan. I clicked my way across the parking lot, carrying the cash tucked under my arm like a Pomeranian, then clicked my way across the tiles of the bank floor, joining the back of the inevitably long line. As soon as I came to rest, one more thought flooded its way back in. The LSATs were in 1 week. The LSATs had to be taken to get into law school, accredited by the American Bar Association, and they meant nothing to anyone except the admissions board. The questions asked absolutely nothing about law, and they determined everything about your fate. I was aiming for a score that would allow me into a school with a Native American law program and a financial aid package. I needed a financial aid package. I was studying every spare minute I had. The popular option was usually to take a prep course, but because there wasn't one available in my area, I was teaching myself. I moved up in line. The bank security camera always provided high-definition close-ups of the second person in line at the bank. I hated looking at myself in that camera. Sometimes I could only see that I had been gaining weight, and sometimes it was that my hair was unkempt. And other times I would catch my reflection out of the corner of my eye and be attracted to the striking woman in the monitor before realizing it was me. I always tried not to make eye contact with the woman in the monitor, no matter which version of me she was. Another step forward. I held the cash at my waist and tried not to see anyone. I had just cashed out a 401k with Radio Shack that I used to pay off my credit card, but I still had so much debt. My student loans were still another $10,000 and another $10,000 in credit cards that had sold me an extravagant lifestyle that I could not afford. I had made the goal of at least paying off my car so I could lower my insurance payments before taking off for law school. But even with my new raise, it was another enemy of my precious dream. Another step forward. Besides running the store and studying for the LSATs, I was working on my second internship with the Yurok Tribal Justice Center, an hour north in Klamath, California. I didn't have any experience working in a law office, and I could see that without an internship or a bar card, it was going to be impossible to get hired. The atmosphere of law offices seemed to be that all the attorneys were perpetually busy, and no one had time to train anyone. Some certifications existed for legal secretaries and paralegals, but considering I was going for the full Juris Doctorate, it seemed like a step in the wrong direction. I was working 10 hours a day, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and sometimes on Sundays. Every Wednesday, I would rise at 5 a.m. to catch the carpool from Eureka to Klamath. I would shadow an attorney from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., then catch the carpool home. The work was draining. The attorney and I handled a lot of divorces, custody battles, and domestic violence issues. Sometimes after a day interning, I would collapse into my bed with my silk blouses, skirts, and high heels still clinging to me, too tired to take them off, and just fall asleep that way until morning. I was with a bank teller now, the cool air from the fans blowing on me, and the sheen on the counter weary from exchanges of wealth. The gold nameplate told me my teller spoke Spanish. I handed over my girth of cash to deposit and explained very succinctly how I need my change. This many ones, this many fives, this many dimes, nickels, quarters, and so forth. I handed over a separate bundle of ones to supply the funds for this, and an official Wells Fargo change slip, documenting exactly what I was handing them and exactly what I needed back. The teller was able to figure out how many tens I needed before asking me to repeat the entire order again. As I stood there in the bank, waiting for the teller to stumble through elementary school math, I thought of the taste of beer. I thought about a cold, salty, yeasty pale ale, and how much more patience I could muster if I knew there was a beer waiting for me at the end of the night. The beer was in a place where the guy I had been seeing broke things off with me a couple weeks ago on Labor Day. I had started a casual relationship with this partner because he was non-committal, and I figured that once I started law school, I could leave him. I tried to convince myself that this relationship had benefited me more than him, but his assertiveness in ending things first shattered my denial. I had made all the right moves to avoid rejection, yet it had found me at 1:30 in the morning on a teetering bar stool, awash in glowing red lights. "Is there anything else I can do for you, ma'am?" The teller jolted me out of my self-pity. "Ma'am." That comment was a deliberate slight. I was only 28. I recounted the order and explained to the teller he had shorted me $1, which I needed in quarters. Teller didn't have any more quarters in his till, so he went to go buy from another teller. I pushed my heels into the tiled floor and tried to breathe in the cool air coming from above me. Finally, the teller returned. I gathered my change off the counter and scooped it into my now much heavier bank bag, thanked the teller, and left. Trying to get out of the parking lot was difficult with the traffic and the detour around the fair. I tried to play some music. Only 1 week left until the LSATs. I did a mental checklist again. I had my paperwork filled out. I had my printed ID card. I had my... Oh shit. I had completely forgotten that the LSAT required you to bring in 2 official passport photos to take the test. Where could I get passport photos taken? Didn't I get them taken at the post office last time? Isn't there a place here in Arcata I could take them? When would I have time to do that between now and next Saturday? I signaled towards a shopping center, remembering there was some kind of mailing store near there that did passport photos. I was on a residential street now, my car drifting maybe 20 miles an hour past houses and cars lining the streets, crammed into the spaces. Passport photos. Tribal court. Red light. Ma'am. LSAT. Red lights. Lunch breaks. Suddenly, it was like every thought was present in my mind at the same time. Like someone took every single beverage out of the fridge at once, each one of them manageable and palatable by themselves, and dumped them all down the drain, a swirl of color and chemistry, the liquids now impossible to distinguish. There was a flash of white, and then it was like watching my own life as a movie. The car was still moving, and my hands were still on the wheel, but I was no longer in control of it. I was an audience member, just as eager to find out what happens next as any other viewer. I didn't steer it, but the car drifted slowly to the right, towards the bumper of a delivery truck. the steel corner like the needle on a spinning wheel in Sleeping Beauty's story. I was moving toward it, absent of my own will, and I couldn't stop it. I was not moving very fast. Any other driver who had not just had a shortage in their brain would have been fully able to avoid this accident, but I was not a participant here. I could only watch. The noises were terrible, but they could not force me to move or react. Only the blast of an unstoppable force colliding with an immovable object, ricocheting up my brain stem, forced me back into my own life. After the crash, everything went into high speed. There was already traffic piling up behind me. I put the car in reverse and pulled it back off the steel monster that had violated it. I heard pieces of it fall into the street, plastic and rubber bouncing off the asphalt. The rusty brown, the muted color of steel of the industrial delivery truck was unchanged, and I was in pieces. It wasn't a fair fight. I pushed the car back into drive, aware of the stream of traffic behind me and the stream of traffic coming at me. There was no place to pull over. There was no place to stop. I drove the wrong way down a one-way street and pulled over to the right immediately in front of the fire hydrant. There were 2 children selling lemonade. My throat was dry and the heat snatched breaths from my chest. The children's mother watched me cautiously as I tried to do 5 things at once. I called the insurance company first, then hung up. I tried to call AAA. I needed to get my car out of here. The insurance agent took my information and let me know they'd call me back as soon as they could find a driver. As my flight response rose, all I could think about was how badly I needed to get out of here. Then I remembered I couldn't leave without all the change getting back to the store. The store couldn't make cash transactions if it didn't have change, and if it couldn't make cash transactions, it couldn't stay open at night. The majority of our sales, close to 80 or 90%, were in cash. Without the ability to make sales, our top spot in the district would fall overnight. Somehow I lost my phone. It was in my hand, and then I didn't have it anymore. I had to call the store. I had to call the insurance company. I got out of the car. I stood up. It was gone. My head whirled in panic, and I ran over to the mother watching her children in the yard on a beautiful, sunny September day. "Can I use your phone?" I asked hysterically and a bit too loud. I tried explaining quickly. "I just got into a car accident and I have to move my car and I can't find my phone." The mother, who had 2 5-year-olds and didn't even react as she calmly went into her house and handed me her cell phone. She seemed to want to tell me that I had never experienced a real emergency in my life. She handed me her Motorola touchscreen and I called my mother. My mother was thousands of miles away on the other side of the country and could do nothing for me, but my hand automatically dialed her number. I told her I was in a car accident. I hit something. I tried to convey my own panic to her, tried to get her to telepathically know that I needed her to calm me down, but she only heard the wild, nonsensical string of words her daughter was attempting. She said, "See, Elaina, this is what happens when you take on too much." And then I did the cruelest thing I've ever done to my mother, whom I love so much. I hung up on her. I could not explain that I was not in a position to calm her down right now. I could not understand that she was not just my mother, but a person who reacted to things and got upset when people she loved got upset. I could not make any more words. I made another attempt at a phone call and tried to breathe slower. Somehow, the conversation with my mother did calm me down, and I figured out that if I had been talking on my phone in the car before it was missing, and I had never left the car, The phone could not be far. I sat in the driver's seat with all the windows closed and used the mother's phone to call my number. A buzz came from under my seat. I very sheepishly returned the phone to the woman and thanked her profusely. The shopping center was only one more block, and I couldn't handle the helpful pedestrians explaining to me that I was facing the wrong way anymore, so I moved my car there. The parking lot was not much better. It was a shark tank of cars circling, looking for a parking spot to get to the fair. I defiantly parked my car in at the end of a line of cars that was not a parking spot, but still gave drivers plenty of room to get around me. The sharks did not like that. They gave me dirty looks as they drove by slowly, and I ignored them. I called friends to see if anyone was available on a busy Saturday to take me home. I called the insurance company again. I called the store. One employee, Kevin, was working that day and had their car, but they were out at lunch. I asked my assistant manager to please have him call me when he got back. My mother tried to call me back continuously as I made these calls. I did not pick up. Once I filed a claim with my insurance, I had contacted Kevin to pick up the change, and I had someone coming to take me home. I finally returned my mother's call. I knew she'd be angry, but I knew it would be even worse if she thought I couldn't handle this situation on my own. She said she was 1 minute away from calling the police. She asked me what was wrong and why I couldn't tell her. Why had I just driven my car into a delivery truck? Why had I just added another problem to my plate? Only after I could assure her of all the elementary tasks I had completed and could talk with a level voice did she let me get off the phone with her. I surveyed my position again and determined there wasn't even enough room for a tow truck to get in this parking lot. So I started the engine. I drove my car to the outskirts of town near a city park, parts of my car scraping the road and more pieces falling off of it. As I moved forward, the drivers who saw me trying to tell me I was insane with their alarmed looks. The short journey was worth it because I finally got to the park and it was deserted. I got a returned call from the tow truck driver and told him where I was. The air was beginning to cool into the evening by now, and I exited my car and sat down on the cool grass. I was okay now. I fielded minimal requests from strangers walking through, asking if I was okay or if I needed any help. I couldn't stop looking at my car. It didn't deserve this. Maybe I deserved this because I was trying to break into a world completely unfamiliar to me that I didn't deserve to be a part of. I didn't come from money. I didn't have college graduates in my family tree. I thought maybe the universe was trying to give me a sign. Kevin made it to the park. He was a tall, cheerful young man who always had a good attitude and uncontrollable black curly hair bouncing behind him. He hugged me. He collected the change and my keys to the store so an extra person could stay on tonight and lock up. I thanked him and thanked him again, a little embarrassed but grateful for his kindness as an evening breeze blew past us. It was finally the end of the day. My mother would take off work the following week, and we would stay in a hotel the final 4 days leading up to the test. She would feed me and talk me through some of the most difficult ideas. She would do this without me asking her to. She would do it because she loved me and only mention a couple of times that if this was the field I wanted to work in, I would need to learn to manage stress better. I would take the LSATs next Saturday and get a perfectly adequate score. I would remember that because the accident happened while working at Radio Shack, the corporation would pay my deductible to fix the car back to brand new, and while it was being restored, I would drive a gray minivan all over town, towing with me only my anxieties instead of children on their way to soccer. The car would eventually heal. I would eventually heal. And I would learn for the first time, legs splayed out in the grass as the day faded, that I had a breaking point.
El Mozote Massacre, El Salvador. Irma A. Ramos Arreaga. Awakened suddenly by a distant noise, followed by discomforting silence, I wondered the whereabouts of my boys, who didn't realize the dangers of defiance. A soldier violently threw me aside. As I stumbled, I was brought to a halt, petrified by my children who lied open-eyed, lifeless. The aftermath of an assault. I could barely see anymore, but the other woman's screams were enough for me to know what we were brought for. Praying God gave me the strength to be tough, I peacefully took my last breath, knowing I'd reunite with my town after death. The massacre of El Mozote happened during the Civil War in El Salvador on December 11, 1981. There were roughly 800 citizens murdered by the death squad, known as the Atlacatal. The village was targeted by the government because of suspicions of their alliance with the guerrillas. This led more citizens to join and help the guerrillas against the government.
Hello everyone, my name is Walid Abdullah. I'm gonna read to you a poem entitled Blood Merchants. In Arabic, it's called Al-Muqatiluna Bidima' Misr. It was written by the great Egyptian poet Farouk Gouida and translated from Arabic into English by Andy Fogel and I. Let's start. ينامون فوق صدور الغواني ويبكون بالشعر عهد الوليد وتحت المضاجع أشلاء عمر وأحزان وذكرى شهيد وفي الكأس تبكي بقايا دماء وأنقاض عطر وأنفاس غيد ويلقون فوق رؤوس الصغار ثياب الغواني وخبز العبيد وفي كل يوم يبيعون شعرا ويبني على الشعر قصر جديد يسيرون بالشعر في كل درب وفي كل يوم مزاد فريد تعالوا نقاتل من جوع مصر ونلقي على الناس حلو القصيد تعالوا نصافح آلام شعب ونصرخ بالحزن هل من مزيد تعالوا نسكر من دمع أرض ونغتال فيها الزمان السعيد تعالوا نحطم أحلام مصر وندفن فيها الصباح الوليد تعالوا نتاجر في دمع تعالوا نبيع رفات الشهيد تعالوا نسخر من حزن ثكلى على راحتيها شباب شريد تعالوا نحرق أزهار عمر ففي الزهر يركض حلم جديد تعالوا ففي مصر سوق العطاء ومنها ربحنا وفيها المزيد تعالوا نبيع بعطر الجواري دموع الصغار ويأس القعيد تعالوا نلقي على مصر صبرا ونغرس فيها هموما تبيد وهيا لنكتب شعرا جديدا فما عاد في العمر شيئا يفيد وآه إذا الجرح أضحى رخيصا تباع الدماء بسعر زهيد وتحت المضاجع أشلاء عمر وفي الكأس تبكي دماء الشهيد يصيحون فوق صدور الغواني يعيدون بالشعر عهد الوليد. Thank you so much for listening. Walid Abdullah.
Blood merchants. Asleep on their mistresses' chests, they profane the age of Walid. The dust of our age collects beneath the bed, mingles with a mother's sadness and a martyr's memory. Blood dregs stain the cup. The ruins of perfume and the breath of young girls hover in the air. The merchants toss the young soiled rags and slave bread. They sell poetry and build a new palace. On all their routes, with all their victims, they use poetry. Every day is its own auction. With the hunger of all of Egypt, I am called to fight by giving people poetry. Let me face and hold their pain. Let me ask, is there more of this? Shall we drink the tears of the earth and burn the roses of good times? Shall we smash Egypt's dreams and bury the newborn morning? Maybe hawk the martyr's bones, laugh at a mother who's lost her son. Let's pawn her very tears, discern the homelessness of the youth in the wandering lines of her palm. One of their dreams lies gutted beneath roses, but there are more in the market. We have profited much off Egypt's open hand, and there is more to make. With the perfume of slaves, we can lull the young to tears and keep the crippled crippled. We'll entreat them to have patience, like one tending to a garden where we planted disillusionment. All the lowdown know, when the wound becomes cheap, so does blood. We know dregs darken the cup. We know dust collects beneath the bed. We know when there is nothing of value left, we write new poems.
A Walk in the Woods. 1. The dust of boots on earth clouds the path ahead like morning mist rising off the lake. Sun warming, and I wrestle thoughts of humanity's destruction. Winded, I rest on stump, drink water, wondering if I wonder too much. Am I getting neurotic in an age that moves too much? Faster and faster past the hour at Fern Falls. All's well in love and war, and look where we are. All alone, in the world, no more. 2. We eat and drink ourselves into the ground, feed ourselves. Tears drip, us yearning, you not here, me not there, and then it's gone. Just like that. Trip over root but land on my feet. Thoughts are in the trees. Seasons break moods and melodies into moonlight. Sleep tight only to wake with crick and spine. Head aches and I shake for fear of planet wrought with disease. People getting off for rape. Getting shot for being black. Fuck your flag. It's like that. Tradition. Struggle on, cornbread and collard greens. Break dancing, beat breaking, freestyling. Blowing them horns. Slapping that bass. Yeah, we keep making it. Like that.
Truce, Martin Pedersen. In a war I'm losing, catching up on my ironing, dress shirts, polos, slacks, sheets, and towels gets me back to break even, which is not ideal, happy, or blessed, but a truce for sure. Well, last month the car died, taking my friend to chemo. That promotion? I'll be lucky to survive budget cuts. Read this, see this, you haven't eaten out in how long? But if I can take the big brown wicker basket, set it all out, and chug away, I think I can get caught up, that is, on steam ironing. I might be okay.
Potatode by Todd A. Loughran. You're an ugly little spud, aren't you, covered in dirt, staring back at me with your many eyes. Oh, the things I can do to you. I can mash you, smash you, turn you into hash. Change you from a russet to a Hasselback. Make you learn French. Fry your Idaho-ness away. Make you a true Todd. Give you some golden curls, red shoestrings, and purple wedges so you can become a beautiful duchess. Let's cut to the cheese. Sometimes you're sour, sometimes you're sweet. Occasionally you need to be baked twice. In the end, you're great like bacon because you go with everything, including bacon.
The Father of Candles, Charles Haddox. When the rains fell in Colonia San Martin, the cinder-covered streets would glisten like glass or fish scales, rivers of smoke and sky. It was as if the stars were raining grave crosses, adorned with silver nails. An abandoned neo-Mudejar mansion on the corner of Calle Cuervo and Avenida Volcan Sabruco, that had once belonged to a wealthy family, would provide temporary shelter for the neighborhood's feral children, though the three of us weren't truly feral. Leona, Oscar, and I were simply ignored. We would light a fire of sticks and fallen ceiling laths in a black marble fireplace on the eastern wall of a once grand parlor. A corner of the room held an altar left by holy mendicants, the statue of a bearded saint surrounded by chains of palm leaf and paper, as well as candles melted long ago into white and golden globules without form or cords. We called the saint, who was propped up on an old cane stool, the Father of Candles, or Old Saint Joseph. We used to say, he's as smart as Old Saint Joseph. Sometimes we'd also say, he was as nice as the Father of Candles. The family that lived in the house fell on hard times and sold off everything they owned, piece by piece, long before we were born. Nothing was left but a solitary bird living in the attic. My mother once told me that everything was bought by a moneylender, candle holders and enameled plates, forged copper roses and pins of gold, all the way down to the sepulchral doors. Even the damp-stained family portraits. A winter house, empty as the wallet of night. A ghost house. The very walls were collapsing. What a sad little story, sad as an old man singing along with the band, or a lost dog wandering here and there, or the waiter who always wanted to be asked to sing. We would open our bag of snacks, warm bread or tortillas sprinkled with salt and sometimes stuffed with beans or cheese, and old coffee with milk and sugar in a 2-liter pop bottle that we would drink like bees drinking nectar. It was sweet, bitter, thick as molasses, but we'd pretend it was chocolate milk. I was brought to that place by my parents, San Juan de los Lagos. They had family there, my mother's family. We were visiting, just visiting, and the children were my cousins. But it's customary in Mexico to call even the most distant relatives cousins. A little fire in the rain. In an old house almost empty, with the lonely bird and old St. Joseph. The rain falling like a full sack, in the September of ripe amaranth, a tender voice in its rattle, its shorter days and violent skies. With my cousins, enjoying a little feast. Oscar, who everybody called Trompo, said sarcastically, "This is the best food I ever ate." "Screw you, Trompo," cousin Leona answered. She was older and stronger than the two of us, so she could say whatever she wanted. And she had made the snacks, tortillas stuffed with beans and smashed Fritos. Trompo could never sit still. He had infinite amounts of energy, liters of juice, a rotor tricolor that never burned out. He ran from one room of the gloomy old mansion to the next, like a deer being chased by a jaguar, spinning and waving his arms. If he sprouted a few feathers, he'd wheel into the air. He was also the master of a good shriek, and obliged us superbly when he found the body of an old man lying on the floor in one of the former bedrooms. It was the first dead person I had ever seen. I'd never even been to a funeral. Leona knelt beside the body and shook its narrow shoulders, because she wanted to believe that the old man was only asleep. His skin was yellow, and his mouth hung open. Even though I had never seen a body before, I knew he was dead. Trompo started screaming and started cursing under his breath. Quicksilver stars continued to fall from the sky outside the vacant windows. The earth was filled with their gentle patter. One of the bedroom walls had a dark water stain caused by a leaky attic, the soul of the dead man embossed on squalid plaster. My beans and tortillas and crushed Fritos wanted to make a return to the wider world. "He's dead, mija," I finally managed to say to the tough little girl in pink overalls. Turning the guy into jelly. Leona stopped shaking the dead man and looked up at me, a look, I swear, that scared me more than seeing the body. "I'm not your hija." She stood up and walked toward the window of the bedroom. Trompo was back to whirling like a wheel, practically giving off sparks. It wasn't helping my stomach. "Settle down, idiot," I said to him. "What are we going to do with the dead guy? We're not even supposed to be here. Fuck! We're supposed to be at Leona's mom's store." "Shut up, you guys," Leona said as she perched on the edge of the blue-tiled windowsill. "If he was killed by narcos, they'll be coming for us next." He'd be covered with blood if somebody killed him. This old guy just dropped dead. "We're not supposed to be here," Trompo muttered in a sing-song voice. Leona looked like a shadow in the window. "If we have to tell somebody about this dead guy, we can say we were just passing by the place and used it for shelter when it started to rain." "What happens when they find our fire?" Trompo asked. "We can say it was already going. Somebody else left it behind." For once, I was glad that Leona liked to take charge of things. Propped up on the windowsill, framed by a corona of purple clouds and argent thunderbolts, she looked like an avenging angel, weighing souls at the Last Judgment. What to do about the body of an old dead man in a place that we weren't even supposed to be? For a moment, we entered the world of adult concerns and adult responsibilities. "Hey, what if he starts speaking to us?" Trompo asked. "What if he tells us, 'I'm the father of candles'?" "Shut up!" Leona and I said together. Leona pulled out her phone and started texting her boyfriend, a bear-like 11-year-old who was rumored to have once peed on Trompo. I'll ask Oso what to do, she said, as her fingers danced like drunken marionettes over the keypad. Bob Oso, you mean? Trompo said sarcastically. Yeah, we really want him to get involved. Leona stopped texting. What do you want me to do? Call the police? On Baboso? Sure thing. She picked up a piece of broken plaster, as big as the devil's scrotum, and threw it at him. It burst into a million pieces when it hit the wall above his head. Bits of plaster fell on the old man's ragged shirt. Poor old man. Maybe he was somebody's grandfather. Leona looked at me with surprise on her face. You're acting like you knew him. Trompo chimed in. He's the father of candles. He's the father of candles. Shut up, Leona and I said together. Leona got down from the windowsill and said to me, He can't have been here long. We were in this room just the other day. Are you sure he's dead? He's dead, I said. What if he's in a coma and needs a doctor? You still breathe when you're in a coma. Okay, he's dead, Leona said with the finality of a bridge collapse. Have you ever even seen a dead person before? I asked her. I saw Linda's baby at his funeral. They said he was an angel, but my abuela told me a story one time about a dog who was so pious he wouldn't eat meat on Friday. They said after he died, he became an angel. Linda was another cousin. She was married to a grasshopper from Teocaltiche. How about this guy? Trompo asked. Him? Are you kidding? You know what they say. If you have a tail, you're not invited to the angel's ball. Trompo turned to the old man on his side with a sturdy cedar lath to see if he really had a tail. I'm freezing, Leona said. Let's go sit by the fire. As we warmed ourselves, I looked in the food bag for scraps. It was empty. Man, for somebody who didn't like the snacks, you sure ate them all. Trompo let out a belch in reply. The worms of the farmer sala were mottled with patches of light just above the door, a light so faint that it wasn't really there. A phantom light, or a play on the eyes. Tiny clusters of bioluminescent fungi were growing out of wet and crumbling lime. Picking the empty coffee bottle, Leona said, The rain's over. Let's go. Somebody else will find the old man. Yeah, I said. Some other kids. That's not our problem. Leo, you want to deal with my mother and the police? No. But shouldn't we at least cover him up? With what? Let's go. A pale streak of moonlight peeked through a tall, keyhole-shaped window. The sky's front teeth in lips of cloud. I thought I heard the singing of a solitary bird, a somber buinwete, or the devil's favorite jig. In the bedroom, the body made a rustling sound as it rolled over. The father of candles! Trompo wailed. Leona and I exchanged a quick look as we hurried with our cousin to the cavernous front doorway.
My parents always told me to stay away from the mud and the snow. The mud will slow you down, Father said, and stick to your clothes. The snow is fleeting, my mother told me sternly. You'll spend your life chasing it. The sun is all you need to be happy, my brother once said, but I was not. There was a need to fill my curiosity. I wanted to see what hid in the mud and the snow. I went to the snow first. The large blankets were so much easier to find. Standing in the snow, I took a breath, closed my eyes, and thought, this is what it means to be happy. When I opened my eyes, the snow was gone, so I had to search again. The snow, which was once new and invigorating, got old. The chase to find new mounds and piles left me feeling hollow, never as happy as the first time. Every time the snow would leave, I would cry. So I turned my search for the mud, as it was more stagnant and longer lasting than the snow. I found a forest that had mud hidden in the ground. I took a shoe off and dipped my toe in the mud. It was soft and cooling, and all my thoughts drifted away. This is what it means to be happy, I said, but I was not aware of the snake in the mud as it approached and bit me. My mother did not tell me of the snakes that hide in the mud, but that did not deter me. The mud was soft and cooling against my skin. It slowed my thoughts and numbed my limbs. In exchange, I let the snakes bite me, over and over and over. I would spend hours in the mud and let my limbs be wrecked by the snakes, just so I can spend more time in the mud. I didn't need food in the mud. I didn't need friends in the mud. I just needed the mud. Until one day my father pulled me from the mud and told me, I told you not to play in the mud. I was furious when he took me away and sent me to a room. The longer I was in the room, the more mud dried off my clothes. When there were just stains on my clothes and body, I could see the marks, I could see the damage of the snakes, and I cried, "Father," I yelled from my room. "If only you had told me what lied in wait of the mud, I would not have gone." When I had only a few stains on my clothes, I tried the door to the room and found it was unlocked, and so I ventured outside, with a plan to stay away from the hollow happiness of the snow and the painful bites of the mud. As I walked away from the room, on a path that led me far from the snow and the mud, I thought, this is what it means to be happy.
Thoughts for Food by Brooke E. Minor. Protruding stomach, too much food. Tomorrow don't eat, especially carbs. Pour yourself a drink, don't look at your reflection. Don't look at your reflection, you'll see your stomach bloated with drink and residual food, made up of the carbs you dare to eat. You dare to eat, toilet water reflection, regurgitate carbs. Angry stomach, I hate food. Another drink. Another drink, who needs to eat a plate of food when the reflection of a flat stomach tastes better than carbs? Tastes better than carbs, not as good as a drink on an empty stomach. You have to eat, says the reflection, food. Food is too often not food. Refined carbs, foil wrap reflection, sugary saturated drink. Most Americans don't eat on an empty stomach. Stomach food, eat carbs, drink reflection.
Metamorphosis points. I would paint my skin into a colorless color, and I would dye my hair, wear 2 blue contacts, and I would even go for plastic surgery. But if I really do, I assure you, I will not remove my native village accent. While speaking this foreign tongue, I began to imitate like a frog at age 19. Nor will I completely internalize the English syntax and Aristotelian logic. No, I assure you that I will not give up watching movie or TV series, reading books, listening to songs, each in Chinese, though I hate them for being too low and vulgar. I was born to eat dumplings, tofu, and thus fated to always prefer to speak Mandarin, though I write in English. I assure you that even I am newly baptized in the currents of science, democracy, and human rights, I will keep in line with my father's haplogroup, just as my sons do. No matter how we identify ourselves or are identified by others, this is what I assure you. I will never convert my proto-selfhood into white dataism. No, not in the yellowish muscle of my heart.
Incarcerated by T. William Wallen. The door shuts like a vacuum in space. Your identity becomes an X, reference, number blotted onto a wristband, cutting off circulation to the outside. A whistle echoes along alarm bells, squeezing your lungs until all you see is desert. They chant together, God is good all the time, all the time. God is good, but God is not in here. God is not in here. God is not in here. Every Friday night, they stage fights in the bathroom between cars that the guards create to separate us by skin color. They want us to solve our own problems, but we all bleed crimson and soak pillowcases when we cry. Games of poker end with food cooked in trash bags, trying to feed those with no family. Some are hoping others join their ideology. But prison politics are worse than real politics. Nothing is real. Nothing is sacred. The infirmary is the final sentence for the broken spirit every Friday night. There is no God in here.
Vulture capitalists. A yellow cardinal peers from the metal railing of a skyscraper's boom lift into a Wall Street meeting. The suits remark in short burst buzzes how the bird and its feathers do not fit inside the color scheme of their skyline. Natural beauty, they deem, is only appealing when controlled and tamed within licensed gardens and proving property values. Brokers fail to speculate the value of mutation while cackling that yellow is not even in this season. The capitalists place a call for the boom lift's cables to be cut. Anything to raise the momentary value of their perspectives.
Confronting White Environmentalism by Kayla L. Gomez. Every evening, no matter what happened that day, I sit and talk with my partner about how our days went. We start each conversation with the same guiding question. What was the peak and what was the pit? It always differs. The peak has varied from being assigned as design editor of their department's journal to only taking 40 minutes to find a parking spot instead of an hour, whereas the pit has varied from getting just one question wrong on a quiz to a loved one dying. Since the semester started, I began to notice that days ruled by the pit have been occurring more frequently. I was getting annoyed easier, I honed in on the little things, and I would essentially catastrophize the entire day. It wasn't anything extreme, but it was enough to force me to take a step back and reevaluate what was happening. Why am I angry? What is the root of this issue? One day, my partner and I were grocery shopping. I'm Mexican and Central American, and he's Chicano. We both have brown skin, his being much darker than mine, so it's not uncommon for us to be glared at, or get an occasional temporary stalker as we walk down aisles. This grocery trip, however, was noticeably more hostile than the usual ones. Upon entering the store, we were greeted by a white man in a MAGA hat standing with his arms crossed by the door. He didn't work there. Periodically followed as we walked around by white employees, and treated to some lovely scowls from the white cashiers who were smiling only a second ago at the beautiful white couple checking out before us. When we finally returned to the car, we both breathed heavy sighs of relief and expressed how horrible that experience was. We felt an amalgam of emotions: fear, embarrassment, shame, anger, confusion, out of place. During the car ride home, I began to reflect on these emotions more deeply. I replayed every microaggression that occurred and how each had affected me, weighing heavier and heavier as they built upon themselves. While in this reflection, I began to realize that the weight felt by my experience at the store was similar to the weight that has been sinking in my daily pit deeper and deeper since the school year began. In all honesty, I was confused. I was an undeclared major last year and had been yearning for a sense of place within the university when I fell in love with the environmental studies major. Now I take classes with wonderful professors, and I'm feeling the most enriched in an educational setting than I ever have been before. The program is great. My peers bring interesting and new perspectives, and the discussions are powerful. I genuinely love learning, getting the education I came for, and being in an academic setting. Overall, school has been great so far. Why, then, has this weight been getting heavier with each passing day? I woke up one day and felt out of place. It was cool and foggy, as Humboldt County tends to be, a stark contrast to where I grew up in the Coachella Valley, affectionately dubbed the desert or the valley by locals. A desert in every sense of the word. What it lacks in flora and fauna to the untrained eye, it makes up for in the rich and beautiful culture that roots itself throughout the valley, a culture built by artists, immigrants, the native tribes who exist there to this day, and the locals who know every back road in the area. While I love Humboldt County and all it has offered me and given to me, there are days when I remember what home was and compare that to what it currently is. By no means do I believe one is better than the other, but when I'm walking around the valley, I see a community that represents me, welcomes me with open arms, and makes me feel at home. This doesn't happen often when I'm walking around Humboldt County. I looked at my partner sleeping beside me, saw home in his skin, and felt back in place. I went to class again that morning and began to feel out of place again, only this time it felt different. As my classmates trickled in, I began to realize I was one of 3 non-white people there. According to the 2018 census, the population of Hispanics and Latinos in Humboldt County is 11.8%. While roughly 12% may be enough for Humboldt County, it was extremely jarring to me. Throughout my full day of classes, I took note of how many white people were in the room. I felt more and more out of place and began to think about the implications of this observation. These classes were full of discussions about the climate crisis and movements being pushed by the youth, movements led by youth of color prioritizing justice, intersectionality, and reframing, movements asking for clean water, clean air, and accountability. How funny, I thought, that these youth of color, who have probably been fighting for justice their whole lives, are being presented as a radical change in what environmentalism looks like. Which begs the question, what do environmentalists look like? When you think of environmentalists, who do you imagine? Do you think of the environmentalists who came before, like Rachel Carson, Do you think of the environmentalists who came before, like Rachel Carson, Henry David Thoreau, or Aldo Leopold? Or do you imagine Julia Butterfly Hill, David Attenborough, or Greta Thunberg? Perhaps your local homesteader? Now think of environmentalism. What do you imagine? Do you imagine a mass demonstration? Maybe you think of the 1970s Earth Day demonstrations, the climate strike, or the UN climate conference. When you think of environmentalism, is the main color in your mental picture white? I do not want this perspective to be misconstrued as an attack against white people. This is, rather, meant to question why we tend to view the concept of whiteness as what is typical. While white people tend to hold this viewpoint more, whether they mean to or not, it is still present in communities of color. It's why people of color are referred to as being surprisingly well-spoken by their white colleagues, and consequently told they are speaking white by their own family members. It's why brown and black girls feel ugly for not having rosy cheeks or colored eyes, or why skin lightening cream is so popular among non-white people. It's why television in Mexico is filled with light-skinned actors, despite this not accurately representing the viewership. It's why the history classes taught hones in on the waves made by the Founding Fathers, but never seems to focus on the indigenous people whose societies were far more advanced than we are taught. This view is what leads divisiveness in academia, the beauty industry, media, history, and more. I realized recently that this is what leads me to feel out of place in my major. The concept of whiteness being the norm followed me from the grocery store to school. No matter the setting, it's impossible to escape the assumptions made about you. I will never fit into what many of my own peers view as an environmentalist because I am not a white environmentalist. I cannot afford to consistently shop locally, make the transition to a fully vegan diet, or miss work to attend climate strikes and climate die-ins. Therefore, I'm not a dedicated environmentalist. I advocate for clean water, clean air, and justice for our communities of color. Therefore, I'm a social justice activist, not a true environmentalist. My identity and experience as a person of color living in America merely lends itself as a racial and environmental justice perspective in environmental studies. I am brown, therefore I'm not an environmentalist, I'm a radical perspective. I will not be reduced to a token perspective. I am an environmentalist. I rebuke the gospel preached by mainstream environmentalism, which claims that we need to focus our attention solely on repairing the environment and saving species by using reusable straws and adopting minimalist zero-waste lifestyles. To focus our attention on this cause removes mankind from nature by perpetuating the thought that we are not part of the ecosystem or among the species that need saving. I rebuke this unspoken system of environmentalist brownie points earned by how many protests you attend. To measure your dedication to the cause in this way overlooks the privilege it takes to be able to participate in such events. I rebuke the predisposed notion of what an environmentalist looks like. To envision an environmentalist and only come up with white faces grotesquely overlooks the way. I rebuke the predisposed notion of what an environmentalist looks like. To envision an environmentalist and only come up with white faces grotesquely overlooks the work of Dolores Huerta, Leanne Simpson, Vandana Shiva, Wangari Maathai, Chico Mendes, and many, many others. How, then, can we become better environmentalists? First, we must remember the history of the environmentalist movement. Whether we want to admit it or not, it is rooted deeply in racism. The institutions of environmental power were created by white men and are dominated by white people. There is a reason brown and black voices who have been begging for justice for decades are not as stressed in environmental education of all levels. There is a reason these voices were silenced. It was not accidental, nor was it just a result of time. Second, we must not view brown and black voices as mere perspectives. While I may not speak for all brown and black people, having my thoughts labeled as a colored perspective makes me feel like a token. Labeling my ideas this way separates them from the core issues at hand. It creates further divisiveness in academia and is not appropriate in the context of intersectional environmentalism, which leads me to the third way we can become better environmentalists. We need to reframe what baseline environmentalism is, limiting your vision of environmentalism to keeping the air clear, soils clean, and keeping the icebergs from melting in the name of solely preserving the flora and fauna is cheating you and your fellow humans out of justice. When you fight against the development of industrial sites in favor of clean air, When you fight against the development of industrial sites in favor of clean air, can you not fight for both the flora and fauna as well as the communities of color whose children will develop asthma and other long-term health issues if all goes to plan? When you fight against the use of pesticides in the food we eat, can you not fight for the farm workers who are forced to put their lives in danger of breathing in these chemicals to make a wage? When you bring awareness to the dangers of melting ice caps, can you make your message include both the polar bears and the indigenous tribes who depend on sea ice to bring them food to hunt? Viewing environmentalism only as conservation is inhumane and shallow. Social justice is not separate from environmentalism. It is environmentalism. Lastly, we need to destigmatize conversations surrounding race in the classroom. Environmental justice is not a new idea. It has had time to be explored, yet the conversations surrounding it never reached their true potential. Academia is a historically white area, and to ignore these conversations is to be complacent in the fight for inclusivity. Recently, we had a discussion about race and justice in one of my classes. Not many people spoke up or shared their thoughts, and I suspect it's because race is a taboo subject. As a person of color living in America, I get scared to bring up race as I never want to make the wrong person angry. To some, this is good enough grounds to get hurt or killed. Contrarily, I've heard white peers say that they feel like they don't have a say in discussions about race. In fact, they have a huge part. We need to be honest about race. Do we ignore these important discussions because they are too touchy, or are they too touchy because they force people to confront their privileges? I am brown, but I am not as dark as many of the people in my community. I benefit from white privilege, but not in the way that white people do. I am brown, but I am not as dark as many people. I am brown, but I'm not as dark as many of the people in my community. I benefit from white privilege, but not in the way that white people do, and I want to be forced to confront and discuss this in an academic setting. If we continue to dance around it, we only separate ourselves by race even further. We create a deeper us versus them ideology, which, as seen throughout history, only ends in fear and violence. I do not want you, reader, to feel as though I am condemning the climate movement or the activists who are making waves in the fight for justice. Movement is still progress. I am grateful and excited to be living and aware in a time where I can see history happening before my eyes. I do not, however, want the plights of brown and black environmentalists swept under the rug, as they have continuously been over the course of time. I want us to be critical. I want us to question why the name on everyone's lips is Greta Thunberg and not Shea Bastida, Autumn Pelche, or Vic Barrett. I want to feel as much of an environmentalist as my white peers who fit the stereotype of a typical environmentalist. I want my fellow peers of color and I to feel like we are not only a token perspective of environmentalism, but are core to the movement. I place no blame on the program or the university, both of which preach inclusivity to their fullest extent. Instead, I call out the institutional and historical suppression of brown and black voices in the fight for justice of all kinds. I call out racism and unrecognized privilege. I call out all of us for being too scared to have conversations about race. I understand that it is real and frightening. It has created violence and division in almost every aspect of society. But if race is a constant, why do we choose to ignore it? But if race is a constant, then why do we choose to ignore it? By closing ourselves off to and limiting these discussions, we are cheating ourselves out of a future where inclusivity and intersectionality thrive and take precedent in all areas of our lives. If we want justice, we need to recognize and ask who the justice is really for.
Ebony Films' Spying the Spy is asking the questions. Benjamin Shirley Anderson. Modern audiences who dismiss racial characters in old films as the inevitable symptom of the era failed to appreciate the complex dialogues about representations which were happening during cinema's earliest days. Entire studio systems existed and competed for audiences and actors excluded by Hollywood during the first quarter century. They endeavored to articulate the intricacies of American racial identities and redefine the image of the African America as indicated in 1994 PBS movie Midnight Ramble. Some studios were less self-financed, while others were financed by white production teams. The success or failures of these studios was determined by the satisfaction of an audience's demand for improved African-American experiences on both sides of the silver screen. Ebony Film Company in Chicago allows the excellent angle of the examination into these demands. The Ebony Film Company is infamous for closing due to boycotts. Although Ebony's players and the president were African American, the studio had a white parent company. Before rebranding, they produced vaudeville comedies rife with vile stereotype. A common narrative around the demise of the Ebony Film Company downplays the film's content and stresses studio practices. It is surmised that because of the films in the Ebony Film Company were marketed to all audiences, not only African American eyes, they were scrutinized harder than studios. This scrutiny resulted in boycotts. This is also supported by the quote. In the letter to George P. Johnson of the Lincoln Motion Picture Company, Pollard wrote that his comedies proved to the public that colored players can put over good comedy while any of the crap shooting, chicken stealing, razor display, watermelon eating stuff that colored people generally have been a little disgusted in seeing. You do not find that stuff in Ebony comedies. Examination of surviving comedy by the Ebony Film Company, Spying the Spy, deepens the conversation further. This narrative is a spoof of the Klansman story viewed by audiences in various incarnations over dozens of years. In the film Spying the Spy, Samuel Jackson tracks a German spy to a robed suicide cult. There are various slapstick gags. Sam frighteningly goes down a slide, the footage reverses, and he goes back up the slide. This occurs 3 times until he is hammered on the head. Sam's performance can be perceived as something not so bad by modern audiences. He seems to be a hairbreadth away from Keaton's Detective, or perhaps even The Stooges 3. In fact, reviewer Jessica Samuelson, also known as the Pioche, the Rat Girl, situates the entire film as a homage to the Keystone Cops, with Sam perceived as a slightly brighter than his Caucasian stooges. However, she offers a unique contemporary perspective. Black audiences were able to compare Detective Sambo to Detective John Edwards Bruce's militantly race-proud The Black Sleuth, serialized in McGirt's magazine 1907 to 1909. John Edward Bruce was in an active masonry as spoofed in the Spying the Spies, and he was a black nationalist and oriented author of a considerable intellectuality. He even espoused armed self-defense and black militia activity at the time when whites lynched blacks without fear of the law, making him a precursor to the Black Panthers. Quite naturally, longbrow cinema did not live up to the model of John Edward Bruce's simple, politically motivated Yoruba American detectives sad pipe. So audiences encouraged by black Chicago newspapers and ministers from their pulpits assess Sambo's Sam, lead actor Samuel Jax, still too much a minstrel show character, or Church's critical race films generally regarded them too apt to be morally corrupting, so that women and children in particular were warned away. Chicago's activism against Ebony films meant it closed down in 1919, having produced only 21 short films. This narrative implies that as forgiving as One Night Wish to be Samuel Jackson's performance, studio decisions were not solely to blame to the demise of Ebony Studios. As early as 1918, audiences rejected the portrayals as seemingly innocuous as those in Spying the Spy for demeaning and inadequate. Many worked against its screening as it existed in opposition to progressive and satisfying representations already available in the community. There is perhaps a solid argument that audiences were too discerning, too progressive, or too smart for this kind of thing. Personally, I enjoyed Spying the Spy. I think it has a hair-raising abrupt and it provokes thought. I cannot imagine the moving Be of Nashit in a course without it, although I'm also not sure it would be publicly screened. Certainly, this chapter of film history stresses racial characters in the films of the 20s, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, or early 2000s do not need to be seen as something normal, inevitable, or a part of what needs to be swallowed to understand or appreciate art, culture, or society. 100 years ago, people saw these issues and immediately commanded their friends and neighbors, do not watch these films, do not show these movies. Yet 100 years later, Americans still think it's too early to stop, which is a sobering perspective. There's also a diversity argument which stresses the inclusion of these elements. These voices sometimes cite an imperative to not attempt to erase racism. Even researching what history has deemed race films can be a difficult task as a result. There's a real opportunity to forefront and commend these previous works of film history and conversation, academia, and screening. The removal of racist fixations from curriculum and the culture isn't contributing to some kind of erasure. It's the unworking of a greater and grosser erasure, which happened a century ago and is perpetuated today. Let us forefront the Ebony Films Company president Luther, pictured below, and their star comedian player Samuel Jax, pictured next page. These two men who were doing the work, asking the question, risking their lives and names and fortunes in order to chart the frontiers of unknowing.
When the Muslim girl smiles at a stranger, the stranger looks over and performs an action from a variety of choices. Interaction 1. Sometimes a sweet and simple interaction. It's quick and subtle, where both exchange a smile. Interaction 2. Sometimes they look at me and look away as though they are not pleased, and my face is somehow distasteful. Interaction 3. Sometimes they look at me with painful eyes as though I've done something wrong for simply existing, and thus they turn away as soon as I return their bitter look. Before I smile to change their negativity. Interaction 4. And sometimes it'll cause the stranger to almost walk into a tree, because sometimes they forget they're staring, because sometimes they're lost in their thoughts about me, compiling their prejudices about me, because sometimes they're thinking, where is she from? Terrorists, send her back. I hope she doesn't leave her backpack anywhere, because the backpack challenge is back, and it never really was just about how high and fast you could throw a bag. And so they begin the playwright about my existence and perform it in their mind, just to realize they won't be performing at the Nutcracker or the opera or any venue where people dress in fancy suits to watch a play. I'm sorry, my life isn't the Wizard of Oz. My identity contains no yellow brick road or any dream, especially not one of hope and prosperity, because the American dream wasn't made for me. And I'm living lost, and so is this person that's probably thinking of that American dream that they didn't even realize. I see them frowning and looking like they're really focusing on something, but it couldn't be me, because I was smiling the whole time, and my smile started off quiet and small, but slowly evolved, making me look like the Joker. And eventually I became photo ready with teeth and everything, trying to get their attention because they didn't even notice me for me. Because I want to cure them of this staring problem. I hope their eyes are okay from being left hella wide open for an almost impressive amount of time. Because when you're young, they tell us, don't do that or your face is going to get stuck like that, because eventually they look up and smile and away they go. But only just before they walk into a tree or cement. And my smile becomes the one thing holding me from laughter, because we gotta live somehow and laugh at the things that may not seem funny at the moment.
Bruja by Diana Anaya. Outside it was just another door. The white paint cracking from the saltwater splash of the bay, a rust number 13 nailed to the middle, lucky number 13 to Cubans, and a simple woven mat at the front door, its faded cursive script that read, "Welcome home." But inside,
Inside was a world of color and mystery, of wall-length paintings with a pink-tailed mermaid lounging over craggy rocks, stormy gray waves crashing around her and tossing her blonde hair, jars filled to the brim with caracoles, painted egg cockles, coquinas, and broken sharks of rose petal tellin. One large conch resting outside the jars, plush red rugs stitched together with intricate patterns of golden swirls and stars, covering every inch of the living room floor and matching her equally scarlet love seats and couches, with barely any room for compañía to sit, drink a cafecito, and share apartment floor gossip. It was no wonder my 9-year-old self always begged my mother to see our elderly neighbor Conchita, to sit on her floor and trace the lines of her rug with my finger, to fill my eyes with everything. Her apartment was one of those magical worlds I read about in books. I expected in one of those jars I'd find a fairy, or that beneath Conchita's blue sequin gown hid an iridescent tail. Never mind the smell of Palo Santo that was always burning inside, an incense stick in every room, the air so thick it made my eyes water. A small sacrifice for an afternoon of adventure. Despite my obvious fascination with Conchita and her apartment, my mother did not like to bring my sister and me along on her visits. She always spoke of Conchita as la pobre viejita, the poor old lady, when we were home, and when we visited, my mother always wore a frown, her eyes narrow and darting around suspiciously. Where I saw colorful shells, sparkling beads, and beautiful paintings, my mother saw Santeria, bruja, witch. One day we visited Conchita after she specifically requested my mother bring us, stating she had a surprise. My mother could not refuse, thinking she would look bad if she did, and took us down from our 3rd floor apartment to hers on the 2nd floor. Before we went inside, she warned us not to touch anything, but this time with a new excuse. Conchita was a bruja. That only made me more excited. My mother knocked on the door and the 3 of us waited. My sister stood close behind my mother and I to the side. Conchita opened the door wearing her signature blue gown, her tan wrinkled face breaking into a wide smile. Come in, she says, speaking in Spanish, ushering us inside. I smile hard at her and she reaches down to pat my head. My mother sits on the couch and offers her best guest smile. How are you, Conchita? How are your daughters? She gives my sister and me the crazy eye, as we affectionately called it, signaling us to sit down on the couch beside her. My sister plopped down quickly, but I walked over reluctantly, my fingers itching to touch every shell, bauble, jar, beaded curtain, and rug I saw. They're good, either working or with their husbands. You know how this country is. Everyone always busy, Conchita replies. She walks into the kitchen for a moment, and I hear rustling. When she returns to the living room, she's holding a small paper bag, and my sister and I are excited. I'm leaning off the couch, my feet poised to jump and see what's inside. My sister, normally obedient, is practically bouncing on her seat. Conchita sits on the couch facing ours. I have this little gift for the girls. I hope they like it. My mother nods and smiles, quickly taking the bag. She clasps onto it tightly, hoping she won't have to open it yet, but Conchita urges her. Give it to them. My sister and I, alert to the contents of the bag, begin to nag and whine. Finally, my mother relents, reaching into the bag and producing 2 small, plush black cats. She gives each of us our toy, and over a decade later, the image remains fresh in my mind. Its soft black body fitting perfectly on my palm, its black bead eyes shining in the yellow light of Conchita's apartment, its tiny triangle ears with a patch of pink peeking out, and its long black tail, limp with no plush, but thin enough for me to twirl. I love it, I shout, leaping from my seat to give Conchita a hug. Thank you. My sister stays seated, thanking her as she stares at the tiny black cat she has perched on her leg. Thank you, Conchita, but we have to go now. I have to take Diana to the doctor, my mother says, grabbing my sister and me by our arms and dragging us toward the door. Okay, Conchita says. Come by any time. If you ever need someone to watch the girls, I'm always here. She stands at the doorway, her dress glittering as the sunlight hits her. She squints as she waves goodbye. My mother thanks her again, then yanks us down the stairs. I let her push and pull me as she pleases, too focused on the small kitten in my hands. I'm holding it gingerly, cupped in my palms like a bird, worried if I squeeze the cat, I'll hurt it. I knew my toys couldn't talk, but something inside me felt sure they could see and think and feel, so I always treated my toys as if they were alive. I hadn't decided on a name yet, but I knew I wanted to call the cat something dark and mysterious, something that conjured my bedroom at night when the moon is full. We were headed to the car, but my mother stopped us by the gate, where the giant trash container stood. Then, before I could even react, she snatched the plush cats from my sister and me and tossed them into the bin. She shuddered once they were out of her hands. "Black cats are bad luck," she said. I don't remember how I reacted, if I cried, threw a tantrum, or silently sulked. But I remember the warm plush shape resting on my hand, open-faced, and the way it sunk into the bin.
When amber hits midnight, Brander. Rain stampedes from high like a rush of wild wolves, and I wish I could stop, slow it down, save the damage, but I am under the thick, black sky, taking orders from the stars and advice from the moon, though I vowed not to comply anymore. My will is thin as twine, and soon it will snap. Soon what hides in sunlight will escape into the storm. The unruly bout hiding will grow fangs and sprout claws and peel into the crowd without asking for forgiveness. So I crawl in the downpour, yell at the rain, and negotiate with the moon to keep the monster quiet. One night more.
The Jersey Devil and His Trans Masculinity by Silas R. Melvin. Your mother said, I do not want him, let him be a devil. And so you were. Grew wings and horns and too big to fit inside the smallness of human rituals. You were cast from Eden pre-birth. You scare the locals with your grieving cry, your only one, mating calls in the night. Townsfolk locked doors and clogged chimneys. Your mother said, I do not want him, let him be a devil. And the prophecy was self-fulfilling. You heard her rejection and became rejected. You didn't exist until you were named. You were named and the mass hysteria followed.
Sunday at Dawn by Alexander P. Garza. Madrugada de Domingo. Cars stroll down Old Dixie Drive. Rubber to pavement, engines purring, reminiscent of the Gulf's chorus. December is everyone's favorite. My wife knits a blanket. Though he'll be here any day now, my wife is just as passionate about me as she was before she was expecting. She leads surprise attacks of love, engulfs my senses, endorphin high, glazed eyes, gentle nudge of earth out of orbit for a little while, memory creation, touch sequence formation. I tell her, you are beautiful. I tell her, you are pretty. But these words are more than lacking. I tell her that I want you. I tell her that I love you. But these phrases aren't ones that give these feelings justice, and elegance eludes them. The earthly won't suffice. She says that it's enough to show it all through actions. Entonces, continuar, mostrando como te amo esta madrugada de domingo.
Calling for submissions to Toyon issue number 67. For full submission guidelines, please visit toyonliterarymagazine.org/submit. All submissions are welcome. Thanks for reading.